Well, I got to tell you, it's kind of good to put this on again. I haven't. Well, actually, it's not true. I was going to say I haven't preached in 16 weeks, but I have. While I was away, I was in a Catholic institution, and so we celebrated Mass every day. And every Sunday, there was a sermon. And one of the priests who would lead the Mass, now I don't get this, but he didn't like to preach. And I went, well, I kind of like to preach. And so so every time he led worship, I got to preach. Of course, the first Sunday that he asked me to preach, he said, so Reverend Bill, anyway, I have to tell you that lunch is served right at noon. And so we need you to keep your sermon to 7 to 8 minutes. And of course I laughed. I said, you can't be serious. 7 to 8 minutes, I'm just getting started. And so anyway, we got it. I got them convinced. I talked to the kitchen staff so that they would be okay with us being a little bit later. And I got us to start just a little bit earlier, so that I got a fairly good sermon in. And then on the last Monday, on Easter Monday, they asked me to actually offer a United Church service. So I did. Let me tell you, there were a whole lot more hymns than there were during the Mass. And we sang every verse. And the sermon was an actual sermon. But anyway, having said that, it is great to be standing here with all of you. Now, it's funny that I got this particular reading to start with, because I have a really hard time with being a sheep. I do. I mean, I was in Wales once, quite a while back, and while you're driving through Wales, you notice something. There are more sheep there than there are people. There are sheep everywhere, and the sheep are kind of doing their thing. Okay? The sheep are kind of doing their thing, but they're following along, and the sheepdogs are out there, and the sheepdogs are herding them, and they're obeying all the time. And that really troubles me. I have a hard time. I actually talked about this during my time away, my issues with authority and obedience, right? So I've always had this issue, and it became even more of an issue during the last 3 years and the pandemic, because every time you heard someone criticizing anybody who was following the rules and stuff, they always talked about the sheeple. Oh, you're just a sheeple, doing what you're told without question, yada, 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 yada. So I got this reading. I get this reading, and it's Jesus, the Good Shepherd. And so in that context, right, we're the sheep of Jesus' flock. But then, I read it again, and again, and again, and again. And this week, I actually came to a realization here. We'll leave that up there, but I don't need it yet. But the realization that I came to is, Jesus says, if you heard at the end of what Terry read in the Gospels there, Jesus said, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. So earlier, Jesus talked about the gatekeeper and the shepherd. So the shepherd and the gatekeeper and the gate. And Jesus says, I am the gate. In the same way as, you remember way back at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, right? Jesus says to Simon Peter, if you come with me, I will make you a fisher of people. So Simon Peter is one of the ones who is being gathered, but he is also being called to be one who gathers. I will make you a fisher of people. Jesus calls each of us to be something other than just sheep. And that's when this graphic comes up. This is like, I'm a fan of the Far Side. This is my favorite ever Far Side cartoon. Now you can't read it because the type is pretty small. I have this on a cup at the Embrace Center. And so every day I have my tea out of a cup that has this graphic. And if you can't quite make it out, it's a flock of sheep, and they're all doing this thing that sheep do. They're standing around together. But there's one sheep in the middle, and he's standing there like this. And he says, wait, listen to me. We don't have to be just sheep. We don't have to be just sheep. Jesus actually calls us to be more than sheep. We are called, we are indeed part of the flock of Jesus Christ. Jesus is the great shepherd. But Jesus wants us, it calls us to be something other than sheep that just follow around blindly. It's actually part of what he talks about in this passage when he's talking to the Pharisees, right? People are not going to follow you just because you're a leader of the community, you're a religious leader, whatever. They're not. They're going to hear my voice, and my voice is the voice of truth. My voice is the voice that is leading to the kingdom. And then when Jesus gathers in his flock, he gathers us all in together, and he says, I don't want you to just be sheep. You're part of my flock. You hear my voice. You know. But I don't want you to be just sheep. Jesus talks about, in this reading, he talks about other shepherds, the shepherds who gather in the flock and bring them to the sheepfold, and the gatekeeper who stands at the gate to open the gate to lead them in to the sheepfold. And Jesus says in that scenario, he is the gate. Jesus is the entryway into that relationship with God that we are all called to, that relationship that is promised to us. Jesus is the way into that. But we who profess ourselves to be Christians, who have been gathered into the flock of Jesus, Jesus sends us out. Jesus sends us out and says, don't just stay here. Don't just stay here. Go out and gather in more. You're not just sheep, you're shepherds. You are shepherds to gather others in. You're shepherds who can proclaim and share the good news. The fact that there is something of value to be gained here. Thank you. And what is it that we're gathering people into? What is it that we're shepherding people towards? That's the second reading. Okay, so every time I say this, I remember this thing that's hanging on my wall in the Embrace Center that Victoria made for me. I think I might have talked about it before, and if you've been to the Embrace Center, you've seen it on the wall. It's a wood cutting. It's in the shape of a fish. And it's got a number of scripture passages all along the outside. And it's got a picture of me, and it says, this is one of my favorite readings. I guess I say that a lot. But here, this is one of my favorite readings. This passage from Acts. This passage from Acts gives us a glimpse, as it said in the introduction, it gives us a glimpse into the community that was being formed by those early followers of what was then known as the Way and later became known as Christianity. It talks about gathering people together, bringing them into a common space, taking their possessions and sharing them equally. In that room, people would have come, and they would have come into the room with their slaves with them. And make no mistake, there was still a difference between the master and the slave. That was part of the culture of the day. But, in that room, and we know this because of the writings of Paul and the writings of the other early epistle writers, that in that space, in the communal space, there was no what? There was no rich, or no Gentile, no Jew. No servant, no master, no woman, no man. Doesn't mean that those differences weren't there. What it meant was that those differences didn't make any difference in that space. That when they gathered in community as Christians, as those professing themselves as followers of Jesus, that those differences made no difference in the way they reacted and treated each other. The image that we have from the Acts of the Apostles, they gathered around table and shared each other's food. Those who were in need had their needs met. Those who had an abundance put their abundance on the table. So much so that later on in Acts, we hear that they had to devise this whole system because there was just too much demand on the apostles. They didn't have time to teach and to share the good news anymore because they were so busy doing the administration. And that's how we get the office of deacons officially into the church, into church language. Deacons were called out of the community in order to do that administrative work of tending to the poor and sharing the wealth as it was needed. That's what we're called towards. This passage in Acts. And it tells us, what does it tell us at the end of that short reading? It says that because of the lifestyle, because of the way that people lived, because of the way they shared with each other, that their numbers grew daily. At some points, it says, they added 3,000 to their number. Or they added 5 to their number. Or a household was baptized. But their numbers just grew and grew as more people, as more sheep were brought into the flock. As more were invited, and more accepted the invitation. And this happened after Jesus had died, was resurrected, and ascended. So it was by the words of the apostles and the evangelists who became the shepherds of the day to draw more and more to the flock, leading them to the sheepfold where they experienced the open gate that was the word of Jesus Christ and were welcomed into the ever-growing flock. We don't have to be sheep anymore. That's not what it says. It said we don't have to just be sheep. We are all part of the flock. We are all part of that group We are not, and I know some people kind of every once in a while get concerned about me. We are not Jesus Christ. We are not. I am not. But I am a shepherd. I am a shepherd within the flock that is Jesus Christ's. But the good news, so the good news about the good news is that we are all called to be, at times, shepherds to the flock. It doesn't matter if you wear a collar. It doesn't matter if you get to put a stole on. These are important pieces. There are people who are called out of the flock into particular roles of leadership. And that is absolutely true and invaluable, actually. But we are all called to be shepherds. And what does that look like? What does that look like? It looks like sitting at the table in the tent at Pride, Fort Erie, or at Springfest, or at Boo at the Zoo later on this year, and sharing what we are about. And in sharing what we are about, sharing the good news. The good news that is available to anybody who comes to our table, our booth, who is standing behind us in Tim Hortons. Funny story. I wear my collar on Sundays. There have been occasions when I have stopped at Tim Hortons on my way to or from church. And standing in line, there have been occasions when someone has looked, they've been standing there and they're waiting for their coffee or their tea, and they look behind them and they see me. Now, at one time it was me with my hair down to the middle of my back in a ponytail. Now it's me with my mohawk, and they turn around and they go, "Is that real?" Right? Is that real? Like the collar. And I'm going like, well, it's not a fashion statement. Yeah. It's not getting me any brownie points. So yes, it is real. You don't look, so this is one I love. You don't look like any minister I've ever seen. And I go, well, okay. I'm okay with that. But then sometimes, on the odd occasion, it gets into a conversation. Well, what church are you at? Is it a Christian church? What do you preach on Sunday? I usually say I preach Jesus, but but it can lead into interesting conversations that I get the opportunity to have just because of what I do and this collar sometimes. But we are all given those opportunities in small ways to draw people into the flock. And I've also had, and I'm going to finish here because this is really, for me, it's an important part of the story. Because people will say to me, and I've actually had someone say to me, I can't go to church, or I can't be, because I don't want to be just a sheep. I want to be able to think, I want to have my own, I want to be able to put forward my own opinions, etc. The perception on the parts of some is that once you join the church, that you let a lot of that go. And we know that there are some traditions where that might be more or less true. But it's important to tell people, to let them know that you don't have to be just a sheep. That by being part of this flock, you're also not only able to be, but you are expected to be a shepherd. Expected to share the truth. Expected to hear the challenge. And expected to bring others to the sheepfold where they will encounter the gate, and they will encounter a gate that is open to them and open to all. Thanks be to God.